separate you. This is Sparta!
I'll be back.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
For today's movie review, I chose the 1980 movie The Shining.
It's really nice up here, isn't it?
I love it.
Go check it out!
And as usual, I'll give you my movie score up front before I get into my spoiler section of my review. So right up front, my non-spoiler score for this is an 8, which means I think it's a pretty good movie, and I would highly recommend it. This is an R-rated movie, but if you're okay with that and what comes with an R-rated movie, this movie is pretty solid. It makes you think, it keeps you interested, and although this is a 40-year-old movie, very little of this movie feels dated. I did enjoy this movie, and if you stay tuned to my spoiler review section of this review, I'll break it down a little bit more for you, and I'll also give you my take on a few of the things this movie holds. So that's the end of my non-spoiler review. If you haven't seen this movie and you want the surprises, I recommend turning this off now until you've seen the movie. So if you're still with me, I actually took some notes during this movie to try to come up with my interpretation of how certain events happened. But before I get into that, this movie is based off of Stephen King's novel of the same name and follows the Torrance family as they drive up to the secluded Overlook Hotel and kind of be the overseers of the building while the hotel's on kind of a winter break. Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, is an ex-teacher who wants to become a writer and feels the seclusion of the hotel will be ideal for him to come up with ideas for his books. Jack ends up going crazy during his seclusion and eventually ends up trying to kill his family. He is unsuccessful in doing so and ends up freezing to death in the hotel's famed maze. So again, that plot alone makes this movie very interesting, but the movie goes a little bit further than that. Stanley Kubrick tosses in a few curveballs into this movie, which makes you wonder how this or that happens. And the 4 main ones I'm going to talk about are the ending scene, the fridge scene, the tennis ball scene, and I'll lightly touch on the dog scene. First, however, I think the simplest way to explain a lot of this movie's question marks is to give it the simplest answer. In that, the simplest answer is most often the correct answer. So for me, the simplest answer for this movie is that this is just simply a psychological ghost movie, and nothing else further than that. Just simply a haunted movie. End of story. If you look at the movie in that context, the many questions that happen in this movie are easily answered. Anything strange that happens can be attributed to either a ghost or some kind of psychological issue. However, I know a lot of people don't buy that, so I did do my best to break down the more contested parts of this movie. And with that, before I get started, I think I need to lay down some groundwork based on information that's given to us during this movie. Also, I wanted to point out that everything that I'm talking about is from this movie alone, not from the book or the sequel of this movie. I've never seen the sequel to this movie, so I don't know if maybe that movie gave away some of the contested topics of this movie. Like I said, I'm only going over what's presented in this movie. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I think a lot of the key points that happened during this movie are actually brought up during the conversation between Mr. Halloran and Danny. In that discussion, we learned that shining is a gift.
How long have you been able to do it?
It seems to be passed down through the family.
I can remember when I was a little boy, my grandmother and I could hold conversations entirely without ever opening our mouths.
Some people have it and either don't know it or don't believe it.
But there are other folks, though mostly they don't know it or don't believe it.
They can see things that happened a long time ago or that haven't happened yet.
Just like they can see things that haven't happened yet. Well, sometimes they can see things that happened a long time ago.
And that some places are like people when it comes to shining.
You know, some places are like people. Some shine and some don't.
And specifically, Mr. Halloran mentions the Overlook Hotel being like this.
I guess you could say the Overlook Hotel here has something about it that's like shining.
So out of all that, the first thing I want to note is the heredity idea of shining. Which person did he get it from, his mom or his dad? I think it's pretty obvious he gets it from his dad. His dad sees things, has an imaginary friend like Danny, goes into a hypnotic trance like Danny, drools like Danny, and they both see similar things. Now, what I do think the difference here is between Jack and Danny is what Mr. Halloran says.
But there are other folks, though mostly they don't know it or don't believe it.
I think Jack falls into the category of having it and not knowing it. Also important is the fact that Mr. Halloran says that not just people, but places can shine, and he specifically says the Overlook Hotel. I think this is important because we can see Mr. Halloran talking to Danny without anybody else knowing.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doc?
I think this same idea happens between Danny in the Overlook Hotel and Jack in the Overlook Hotel. Both the hotel and each person speak to each other, both in visions and in dreams. So I think this information sets up a lot of what the viewer is shown and why Jack and Danny are going through the changes and weird experiences during this movie and why Wendy, minus the ending scene, isn't. Two of these strange instances is when Jack gets released from the fridge.
You'll give your word on that deal, Mr. Torrance?
I give you my word.
And when Danny has the ball rolled to him out of nowhere. How do both these things happen? I think the other person involved in both these is the opposite Shiner that's not shown in the picture. Danny is the one who opens the fridge, and I think Jack is the one who rolls the ball and opens the door to room 237. One thing to further this is that Jack is seen earlier in the movie tossing a tennis ball and even tossing it and not recovering it. Now, I don't think the ball is pink, but it's pretty coincidental that the tennis ball is used to catch Danny's attention, and Jack's the only person shown with the tennis ball throughout this movie. Danny, on the other hand, was the only other person that could have opened the fridge lock. We know Wendy wasn't the one who did it since she was the one who locked him in there in the first place. And it's obviously not Jack, so it only leaves one other person. Now, the ending scene is a little bit more tricky, but I actually think it's a combination of something Jack says and something Jack hears. Earlier in the movie, Jack mentions to Danny that he loves the Overlook Hotel and he wants to stay there forever.
I wish we could stay here forever and ever.
He is also told by Mr. Grady that he's always been at the Overlook Hotel.
I'm sorry to differ with you, sir. But you are the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker.
I feel this picture is a combination of Jack's want to be at the Overlook Hotel and the hotel claiming Jack. Jack said he always wanted to be there forever, and Mr. Grady also planted that idea in his head that he's always been there. So I think this is a combination of the hotel and Jack combining on that wish, that he's part of the history now, no matter what. Finally, the last scene I wanted to talk about was the dog scene. I originally was going to talk a little bit more about this scene, but then I noticed somebody else already did. This person makes a very compelling argument about abuse, but I just want to point out one thing that I find as a hiccup to that. If Jack assaulted Danny, how come he goes to investigate it? I can understand him telling Wendy as much, and even showing Wendy he's making the attempt to find the room.
Which room was it?
But when he's in the room, if he really did assault Danny, he should know nobody's in there. You wouldn't see him snooping around and apparently scared. This is the same with any criminal or innocent person when they're being questioned. The criminal knows the answers, while the innocent person should be oblivious to them. In the hotel room scene, Jack strikes me as the oblivious type, that he doesn't know there's anybody else either in the room or not in the room. He doesn't know, so he's cautious in his approach within that room. If he did know, he'd just go in the room, wait a couple minutes, then declare nothing's in there to be worried about. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't know what's in the room, so that means he's never been in there. So then I guess the question after that is, how did Danny get hurt? Well, with that thinking, my feelings kind of go towards what Jack already said.
I think he did it to himself.
I feel Danny did it to himself. Actually, off that, one other thing I almost forgot. How does Wendy end up seeing the dog, the guy in the hall, and the ghost room? I think this is Danny and Jack's shining effect in Wendy. I think between Danny being scared and Jack being angry, they're in a way kind of mind controlling Wendy, similar to like a combination of between Obi-Wan Kenobi.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
And Boo from Monsters, Inc.
Good, good, Sully. Keep it up, you're doing great.
Happy bear, he has no...
Ah! Ah! Don't you touch me, touch me! Sully, the bear! The bear! Give me the...
What was that?
I think in moments of high stress, their thoughts kind of get sent out, like the power surge, and manipulate Wendy and what she's seeing. At least that's my take on it, if you don't want to subscribe to this movie being a psychological haunted house type of movie. So that's the end of my review for this movie. I hope everybody enjoyed this. Thank you guys for all watching. And since I've been watching Cobra Kai lately, remember to